This is Arromanches, on the coast of Normandy. 10 years after the battle, pilgrims returned to the beaches where Allied forces opened a second front, to the scene of Operation Overlord. On D-Day plus 10 years, memory is turning into history. These were the D-Day plans. Above the strategy of armada and land attack was drawn, like tracing on a map, the operation of a third force, the air plan for Overlord. A year before D-Day, reconnaissance units began work on a portrait of occupied France. They photographed the whole coast from Belgium to Spain and much of the land beyond. In France, the sound of Allied aircraft was growing more familiar. There seemed to be hope in the sky, although there was still tyranny on the ground. Hitler was moving in troops to a strength of 60 divisions, and of his 7,000 frontline planes, more and more were shifted to the west. France would be the battlefield when the second front opened. From the sky above, we watched the enemy strengthen his defenses. In the 2 months before D-Day, over 3,000 sorties were flown by camera aircraft. Every move and change that could be seen from the air was fixed upon film and brought back for our intelligence.
Allied air forces flew other missions after the sun went down. And we were where French had a special part to play. What couldn't be seen from overhead was discovered by underground means, by our French resistance movement. By night, we flew in agents and equipment from Britain. Those who waited for us on the ground were peaceful farmers or townsfolk by day, citizens of Vichy. But in the dark, they waged a dangerous and ruthless war. For us, the liberation of our country began among these shadows.
The Allied Expeditionary Air Force began their attack. By April, the air commander was operating 700 bombers and 2,000 fighters over France. The Allied bomber commands had already forced the Luftwaffe onto the defensive. Now we could use our air supremacy to paralyze the enemy's ground forces, to batter his communications to a standstill. By the spring of '44, our bombs had torn a line of destruction across the roads and railways leading into Normandy, and had sealed off the battlefield before our first troops landed. As the weeks passed, the weight of our attack closed in on the Channel. Heavy guns guarded every mile of Hitler's Atlantic wall, and radar stations stood along the whole French coast to give warning of our approach. These were next on our list. As D-Day drew near, the Channel itself was cleared of the enemy. The last German ships were swept from the narrow seas. Until the landings began, our air bombardment covered the whole Channel coast, for the enemy must not know what beaches we had chosen for the assault. Nothing could hide our intention, but at least the time and place could be kept secret behind a cannonade of bombs.
In those weeks, everyone in Britain seemed to be busy, and none of them would tell you what they were doing. Many of them didn't know themselves. For instance, in different parts of the country, people were working on a job known as mulberry. But what mulberry was a mystery among many other mysteries. As more and more of our boys came in from the States, they were absorbed into this great secret business. Like the rest of us, they knew what was to happen, but they didn't know how or where or when. Only a handful of the top brass knew all the answers. Montgomery, Tedder, Eisenhower, the supreme commander. Equipment was parked all over the place. Then, one morning, early in June, everything started moving. Every service vehicle in the country seemed to be underway to the south coast, and we knew it was beginning.
Times at night, I send you on my doll.
Say I did.
Big electric lamp.
You finally won it.
Love is heard on discouraging word.
By June the 2nd, everything was ready. The Allied Expeditionary Air Force put on its war paint. The White Star of the Allies was about to fly over Europe. At the invasion ports, 130,000 troops and 20,000 vehicles were leaving English soil without let or hindrance from the Luftwaffe. June the 5th was the appointed day when moon and tide would be right and all could go forward if the weather held. The Armada, fully charged, lay uneasily at anchor as time ticked by. Now all hung on the decision of one man. On June the 3rd, Eisenhower, warned of bad weather, postponed the sailing for 24 hours. The ships, the planes, the soldiers waited. Eisenhower, another postponement meant cancelling the invasion for at least a month, when time and tide might wait on him again. But the weather reports remained bad, and to sail now might bring disaster on the beaches. The final order came on June the 5th. D-Day is tomorrow. The first assault was mounted by airborne troops. On June the 5th, they were briefed. The British 6th Airborne Division would drop on the left flank of the landing area near Caen. The American 82nd and 101st Divisions on the right flank at the base of the Cherbourg Peninsula. Takeoff time was set for dusk on the eve of D-Day. Operation Overlord had begun.
That night, as we set sail across the channel, we could hear the roar of their engines and sometimes see their silhouettes dark in the sky above us. The sea was rough, the wind cold, the hours eternity. But the order of the day still sounded in our ears. To us is given the honor of striking a blow for freedom which will live in history, and in the better days that lie ahead, men will speak with pride of our doings. Let us pray that the Lord, mighty in battle, will go forth with our armies, and that his special providence will aid us in the struggle. Let us go forward to victory.
Further north, aircraft of Bomber Command were orbiting above a Phantom fleet in the Straits of Dover. To make the Germans believe our attack lay there, they circled all night, dropping clouds of tinfoil, which registered as an armada approaching Calais on the German radar screens. The enemy's radar along the Normandy coast lay broken, recording nothing. And they first knew our fleet's position when they saw it in the morning.
We saw land in the first light. It was quiet and unreal. Bomber Command had plastered the shore batteries before dawn, but all the same there was bound to be someone at hand to welcome us. The Navy engaged the remaining coastal guns. Shells, bombs, rockets were loosed against the beaches, and our landing craft moved into the assault. Our fighters gave continuous cover, but the Luftwaffe never appeared. Our only air losses were from shore-based flak. As we approached the beaches, our fighter bombers flew in to give close support, erected by control ships to their targets. It was a long, rough ride in the assault craft. It got worse as it went on. Then we hit the beach, and we were there. Our beaches were codenamed Gold Sword Juno. We attacked with 1 Canadian, 2 British divisions. Away to our right, 3 American divisions were fighting their way ashore on beachheads Utah and Omaha. The battle spread 50 miles along the Normandy coast. Everywhere we met resistance. We'd have made a wonderful target for the Luftwaffe, but the Luftwaffe had been pushed out of the sky. In a few hours, we had a firm footing ashore. We were tired, we were cold, we were under heavy fire, but we were back in France.
This is London. London calling in the home, overseas and European services of the BBC and through United Nations Radio Mediterranean. And this is John Snagg speaking. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, have just issued communique number 1, and in a few seconds I will read it to you. Communique number 1. Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. This ends the reading of communique number 1 from Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force.
Before D-Day ended, reinforcements took off from Britain to support the airborne troops who had been fighting for hours against German pressure on our flanks in Normandy. Another wave of Allied planes set out across the Channel. 250 tugs and gliders, escorted by 15 squadrons of fighters.
By the time the gliders landed, a considerable battle had developed around the 6th Airborne Division's bridgehead north of Caen. Our paratroops were faced with heavy counterattacks by the 21st Panzer Division, the only German armor to appear on D-Day. Within a day of our landing, all 3 British beachheads were linked, and the Second Army held a continuous front.
Within a few hours of the landings, work began on the Mulberry Harbour at Arromanches, and by June the 19th, the new port was in service. Its prime mover, Winston Churchill, had joined the expeditionary force by then to see for himself the result of years of effort. On D-Day +10, the King of England set foot in France. And as his news went round the world, the heads of state and heads of services reviewed their plans for the next phase of the war. A foothold in Normandy was not enough. Before the campaign of France could roll forward, bases had to be built for the whole tactical air force. Squadron after squadron left England for Europe. Among them, the Lorraine Squadron of the Fighting French.
For 4 years, we have served in exile, in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Britain. Now, we are going home. We are going to finish the battle where it began in 1940, in the sky above France. this time, as we fly across the Channel, we see something unusual. The British call it Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean. It will bring us oil and petrol when we are based again in France.
By the end of June, our ground forces were greatly strengthened. On the eastern flank, the British Second Army was threatening Caen in a deliberate effort to tie down the reserves of German armor, while the American First Army fought its way westward across the Cherbourg Peninsula. But by now, the Wehrmacht had collected enough of its scattered forces to hold up our advance. The situation was difficult. We could advance no further. We were bogged down in the bocage country, all woods and little fields and thick hedges. The weather was still against us. It held up our reinforcements and supplies and limited our air support. We had to sit down and slug it out with mortars and field artillery.
But whenever there was enough visibility to fight, the Air Force joined the battle. By now, we had 30 squadrons based on Normandy and many more on call from across the sea. In France, as in Africa and Italy, our air supremacy was complete and was used to the full. By July, the British 8th Corps had struck out and established a salient south of Caen. Little by little, all along the front, the Allied line moved forward, eating away the reserves of German resistance.
Little by little, the Germans are giving up France. This is only the beginning of another campaign which must be fought across our country. But this time the battle is going the right way. Not without pain and death, not without desolation and destruction. But the Germans have a debt to pay and they are paying it now. This is the price of liberation and the price of oppression.
The price of liberation and the joy are both confused, like life and death on this battlefield. But one thing is clear. The Allies are back in France, And an Allied Air Force 100 times stronger than before is here to stay until the war is won. The gliders are empty. The beaches clear. Operation Overlord is done. Already it is D-Day plus a month, and history is turning into memory.